I've fulfilled the dream that you couldn't make come true for Ben, Auntie." Saying that, my niece Nicole flaunted the newborn baby to me. Seeing me at a loss for words, Nicole wore a triumphant smile. "Our baby looks cute like Nicole, right? She'll definitely be a model or actress in the future." My husband Ben added, as if to twist the knife further. "I guess we should be heading home. We've boasted enough about our happiness to the single Kathy. I'm very satisfied today." Ben exchanged a look with Nicole and grinned wickedly. What does he think of our child? To me, who couldn't have children. They were flaunting the baby as if it were merely a tool for showing off. My anger was reaching its limits. At that moment, I realized something. Wait, this child. What's wrong all of a sudden? At my inadvertent remark, Ben reacted slightly. I found it suddenly amusing and laughed.
He he he.
I gently stroked the baby's cheek and said, "She looks like an angel, but her skin." As I revealed a certain truth, the expressions of the two, who had been smiling triumphantly, froze instantly. My name is Kathy Simpson, 52 years old. My husband Ben, an executive at a major trading company, whom I have supported as a housewife for many years. Occasionally, Ben brings his subordinates to our home to enjoy my cooking. Most of what comes out of Ben's mouth are his youthful boasts. The subordinates who are brought along often laugh nervously and endure Ben's long talks. When the subordinates praise my cooking as delicious, Ben grins and says, "Well, that's about the only talent she has. She's feeding off a high earner like me, so she's got to do at least this much. Otherwise, she's just a waste." While I wouldn't say it doesn't bother me, I always remind myself that I'm not in a position to argue. We've been married for nearly 30 years, but we've never had children. I had always dreamed of having at least 2 children after marriage and spent time and money on fertility treatments, but we were never blessed with children. Because of this, I always felt a sense of guilt. So no matter how heartless the remarks Ben made, I always laughed them off and endured, thinking, I'll just bear with this. When Ben talked about his work, his eyes would sparkle like those of a boy. And I was happy to be even a small part of that strength. After all, I am in love with Ben. I had one other skill besides cooking: sewing, which I had enjoyed as a hobby since my student days. I started making handmade dolls by mimicking what my mother did. And they were very popular among my friends. Using that skill to help with the household expenses, I began making stuffed toys and Lucky Charms. Although it might not compare to the income of a high earner like my husband. Still, I continued these small jobs, hoping to at least serve Ben delicious meals. On weekends, my niece Nicole, daughter of my sister Megan, who works in a small trading company, would stay over. There was a reason she came to stay, to support a fledgling idol group. The other day, Chris was on TV for a bit. Wow, he was so cool. Nicole arrived, fanning herself with a fan featuring a young man's face. Chris was the leader of that idol group. This idol group performed regularly at a club close to our apartment every weekend. So she stayed with us to attend these shows. Nicole, have you got more merch recently? Every time Nicole visited, the amount of her stuff in our room increased. But you know, when new merch comes out, I just have to have it. Plus, Chris is the most popular, so it sells out immediately. I absolutely have to get it. As the concert approached, my niece was ecstatic. Indeed, it's exciting for a fan to buy their idol's merch. And I used to collect records of my favorite singers, so I understand the feeling. However, I wondered why she needed to bring all this merchandise into our home. If you have so much, it must be hard to carry around, right? Isn't it difficult? It's fine. I'll store the merch here. Nicole casually placed her belongings in a corner of our bedroom. We live in a not-so-spacious place with just my husband and me. What? It's okay. Uncle just comes home to sleep anyway. I resigned myself to accepting my niece's whims. Oh, and this. I almost forgot. Mom gave this to me. Saying that, Nicole took out a package of high-quality tea leaves from her bag. My sister Megan and her husband, Ted, who joined the family business as a son-in-law and worked at the store, occasionally sent gifts, ensuring Nicole always brought a gift each time. You really don't have to go to all this trouble. After graduating from high school, Megan worked out of state until she was 30. Then took over the family's general store. Since a large commercial facility moved nearby, their customer traffic had significantly declined. So I always told them there was no need for such extravagant gifts. Megan always feels sorry for the trouble Nicole causes. My sister would say apologetically over the phone. However, Nicole herself has been overstepping her bounds lately. Even when we, the couple, are not home, she has started to enter our room without permission. Upon inquiry, it seems that Ben had given her a spare key. Since you come every week, having a spare key would be convenient, right? Ben sweetly said to Nicole. As expected of Uncle, you get it. Saying this, Nicole hugged Ben's arm, and Ben relaxed his cheek muscles with a smirk. Sigh. I guess it can't be helped. At first, I tried to accept it as much as possible, but about 3 months later, one day, an envelope filled with cash that was supposed to be in the drawer of the desk in our bedroom had disappeared. When I later asked Nicole about it, she replied nonchalantly, "Sorry, Auntie. I borrowed it because I really wanted Chris's new merch." Nicole looked at me with pleading eyes. But she is also working as an adult and should be earning enough to not struggle financially. Wouldn't you feel more joy buying things with the money you've earned yourself? Well, of course, I want to buy with my own salary, but it's just not enough. Nicole's nonchalant words weighed heavily on me. How much money is she pouring into collecting her favorite idol's merchandise? It wasn't just about the money. Lately, the rate at which my skincare lotions and creams are being used up has accelerated. Ben has never been one to care for his skin, so if someone is using them, it must be Nicole. When I confronted her, Nicole readily admitted to her actions. Sorry, Auntie. I just took the liberty of using them. What does she mean by took the liberty? These creams were quite expensive. I frowned. And Nicole deliberately rubbed her arms and pretended to shiver. Auntie, you're scary. Then Ben came along and said, standing next to Nicole, laughing with her. That much should be okay. Don't just laugh, please give her a proper warning. Don't be mad. You look even older when you frown like that. Ben, who rarely jokes, becomes talkative only when Nicole is around. I found this particularly displeasing. Anyway, it troubles me if you keep using things in our house without permission. Nicole works too, so you should buy your own things. If you use my things without permission again, I won't let you stay over anymore. I'll tell your mother that too. As I lectured Nicole, Ben turned red and said, Enough already. The things you're using aren't even earned by you, right? I earned everything with my job. I'm not living in luxury. I'm cutting back as much as I can. I'm not using it for fun like Nicole. The money I earned is my own. I say it's okay for Nicole to use it. Just let her use it as she likes. Being yelled at by Ben, I felt like crying. Indeed, most of our income is earned by Ben, so I couldn't argue further. Knowing that Ben would not support me, I felt helpless as my fingers traced the contact of my sister on my smartphone. No. I shouldn't rely on her for such trivial things. I thought just before making the call and returned the smartphone screen to its original state. My sister and her husband are probably preoccupied with their struggling general store right now. Complaining about my husband would only cause them unnecessary worry. Marital problems must be solved by us. Unable to consult anyone, I carried the unresolved feelings as days passed. On a Sunday morning wrapped in genuine coldness of winter, I was invited by a friend from my student days to go shopping. So I wore a fur coat that I had bought long ago and never worn before. I had informed Ben, who had finally taken a day off. I plan to return by evening, but if I'm late, could you eat first? Just reheat yesterday's leftovers in the microwave. Don't worry about me. Take your time and enjoy. Saying this, Ben sent me off with a broad smile. Ben, who belittles me in front of his subordinates, cares for me gently when we're alone. I genuinely felt happy that I married him. However, when I arrived at the station, my plans changed due to a call from my friend. Sorry. My husband threw out his back and can't move. I feel terrible, but I have to cancel today's plans. It can't be helped. Next time we find time, treat me to fancy French cuisine. I joked with my apologetic friend and ended the call, thinking, now, what should I do? I had nothing else planned, so I decided to return to my loving husband at home. On the way, I stopped at the supermarket to buy lunch ingredients and headed to our apartment. I thought of making some warm stew for Ben. As I opened the door, the heat from the heating and a strong scent of perfume hit my nose. At the same time, I noticed Nicole's shoes, which I always see on weekends. Nicole, are you here? No reply came when I called out. I headed to the living room, but no one was there. Strange, where could they have gone? I definitely felt someone's presence, so it didn't seem they were out. After storing the ingredients in the fridge, I decided to look around the apartment again. I could hear Ben's snoring from the bedroom. Could he be taking a nap this early in the morning? I didn't know much about Ben's work, but being an executive, he must be exhausted on weekdays. So, I thought I should let him sleep on his rare day off. But as I opened the bedroom door to sneak a peek at Ben's sleeping face, an unbelievable scene unfolded before my eyes. On the bed where Ben and I usually sleep, there lay Ben and Nicole, both naked and sound asleep. They were both breathing heavily, completely unaware of my return. Ah. You. My voice was as faint as a mosquito's. More than anger, I felt a profound disappointment in my husband. After calling out several times, Ben finally opened his heavy eyelids. What, Kathy? You're back earlier than expected. Ben seemed groggy and closed his eyes again. Nicole, I'm home. Nicole stretched with a and slowly sat up. Upon noticing my presence, she shook Ben, who was sleeping next to her, saying, Uncle, wake up. We got caught. Wake up. It was like a child who had been found during a game of hide and seek. As Nicole called out to Ben with a mischievous grin, Ben, appearing annoyed, sat up and said with a sigh, What, we've been caught already, and casually yawned. What does this mean? Faced with the reality of betrayal by those I had always trusted, I had forgotten even to express my anger. Well, as you see, this is the kind of relationship we have. Both of you, get dressed right now. I was surprisingly calm as I instructed the two naked individuals. 2 hours later, my in-laws and my sister's family arrived in response to my call. Sorry, sister, brother, for bothering you during your busy time. Don't worry about us. More importantly, my sister comforted me by rubbing my back, while simultaneously giving Ben and Nicole a piercing cold look. What is this about? Explain so we can understand. Though my sister scolded Nicole, Nicole just looked away and kept sighing, checking the latest news about her idol group on her smartphone. This is not the time for that. When my sister took the smartphone away, Nicole clicked her tongue. Kathy, I'm so sorry our foolish son has done something so outrageous. My mother-in-law, Diane, tearfully apologized. Both in-laws were over 80 years old. And it must have been difficult for them to come here in the cold. Was there really a need to call these old folks here? As Ben spoke irritably, my father-in-law, Robert, slammed the table. Don't you have any sense of responsibility? Exactly. After such a terrible betrayal to Kathy. I can't believe you. My mother-in-law spoke in a disgusted tone, glaring at Ben. Ben, how did this come to be? Can't you give us a satisfactory explanation? There's nothing to explain. Men prefer young and cute girls like Nicole over an old lady like her. Don't lump me together with you. I'm ashamed to call myself a man like you. My father-in-law shouted, red-faced, showing no sign of remorse from Ben. And Nicole too. How could she hurt Kathy, who has always been so kind to her? Where did we go wrong in raising her? Ted, usually a man of few words, sighed with disappointment. Then, Nicole defiantly said, actually, it was Uncle who took care of me, not Auntie. Whenever I wanted something, Uncle would buy it for me. He even told me I could use any of the cosmetics and bags in the house as much as I wanted. That's totally different from my stingy aunt. Nicole, apologize to Kathy now. No way. Why should I apologize to such an aunt? Don't bother apologizing. Even if you did, it wouldn't restore my relationship with Ben. I spoke calmly. What was the point of the 30 years I had devoted to Ben? Despite his demeaning remarks in public, I had endured them all because I believed he loved me. But now, knowing Ben's betrayal, everything I had protected had collapsed in an instant. Let's get a divorce. There's no other option. Are you sure about that, Kathy? When my sister asked me this, I nodded firmly. Oh, thank you, Kathy. Now we can get married openly. Saying this, Ben pulled Nicole closer by the shoulder. The two gazed at each other, unconcerned about the family's eyes. On our way here, Dad and I talked. We've decided that if you don't show any remorse, we will cut off our parental ties with you after today. My sister said to Nicole, her voice laced with anger and sorrow. I don't care. I can manage without Mom and Dad, and I'll have Uncle from now on. Then the answer is clear. Don't ever set foot in our house again. Ted spoke in a clear tone. Echoing him, the in-laws said, Ben, we too have decided to sever ties with you as of today. My sister and in-laws apologized to me once more and then left with a heavy atmosphere. Following that, my divorce from Ben was finalized. Through the lawyer, the proceedings resulted in a court order for Ben and Nicole to pay compensation, but Ben insisted, I don't want to burden Nicole. So, he ended up paying the compensation for both of them in full. Less than a month after our divorce, Ben remarried Nicole. I'm an executive at a major trading company. I can easily afford it. I'll give all the joint property to you, the jobless one. Driven by his pride, Ben relinquished the shared assets. Furthermore, having to pay compensation for both put him under considerable financial strain. However, as he is now a stranger to me, I've decided not to worry about Ben's situation and to keep moving forward. I returned to my parents' home and began helping out at the general store run by my sister and her husband. Both of my elderly parents are in a care facility. On days when my sister and her husband visit our parents, I take over the shop. I'm sorry for always making you help out. I'm the one who is imposing. I can't just eat without doing anything in return. My sister and her husband have always been concerned about me, particularly because of what their daughter did. The fact that they are concerned makes me feel even more apologetic. 3 years after moving back home, in the summer, Ben and Nicole appeared before me unexpectedly. Why? As I tended the store, the sight of their smiling faces flashed before my eyes. And a dark, murky feeling seemed to spread inside me. It's been a while, Auntie. As she spoke, Nicole cradled a newborn baby in her arms. At the sight of the baby, I lost my words. If Nicole was holding the child, it must surely be her own. Naturally, that would make Ben the father. Seeing me at a loss for words, Nicole smiled triumphantly. I've fulfilled the dream that you couldn't make come true for Ben, Auntie. Nicole said this while soothing the baby. She used to call him Munkle, but now she just calls him by his name. Faced with this reality, my heart was tumultuously shaken. Just then, my sister and her husband returned from being out. What are you doing back here after all this time? Is that how you greet your daughter who's come home after 3 years? Saying this, Nicole flaunted the baby to my sister and her husband. Look, Mom. This is our child. Her name is Amy. She's your first grandchild. I see. Congratulations. Megan said emotionlessly, without even looking her daughter in the eyes. Nicole turned back to me and smiled. I came to announce the birth. Celebrate with us, Auntie. Meet Amy. Enough. What are you thinking, really? Consider Kathy's feelings for once. Even my usually mild-mannered brother-in-law raised his voice this time. Our kid looks just like Nicole, isn't she cute? I bet she'll be a model or an actress someday. Ben said, beaming with pride. Frustrated, my sister grabbed a broom to chase them out. Please leave now. This is not a place for you anymore. You're disrupting our business, so leave us be. I guess it's time to leave. We've boasted enough about our happiness to lonely Kathy today, and I'm very satisfied. Ben and Nicole exchanged glances, both wearing smug smiles. What do they think of their child? It seems like they use her as a tool to flaunt their supposed superiority. I looked at the baby in Nicole's arms with a heavy heart. At that moment, I realized something. Wait. This child. What's wrong all of a sudden? As I tilted my head, Ben looked puzzled. Suddenly amused, I began to laugh. He. What's going on? Why start laughing all of a sudden? Maybe Auntie has gone crazy from the shock. I gently stroked the baby's cheek and said, she looks like an angel, but her skin. What about her skin? Is there something wrong? She looks very healthy. Her lovely tan is quite different from yours, Ben. Indeed, the baby's skin was a beautiful tan, markedly different from Ben's fair complexion. So? What about it? There's no one with such a tan in my family or relatives. Is that strange? There are plenty of tan people in the world. That reminds me. Nicole said her great-grandfather was tan. That's called skipping generations, right? Ben said, pointing his finger knowledgeably, but at that moment, my suspicion about Nicole turned into certainty. Impossible. What do you mean impossible? Ben, suddenly seized by insecurity, raised his voice and questioned me. I walked away and pulled an old album from the closet in the room my grandparents had used. Here it is, something I want Ben to see. Saying this, I showed him a photo from the album. It's just a family photo. In the photo were my sister and I, our parents, and our grandparents. It was taken in front of the store when my parents started their business. The tall man on the right, that's my grandfather, your great-grandfather, Nicole. So? It's just a normal family photo everywhere. Don't you see yet? Look closely at my grandfather's skin. His skin? He's quite fair. So what? It's normal, right? Ben still seemed unable to grasp reality. In contrast to his bewildered look, Nicole's face was turning pale. It's a waste of time being here. Let's go back and feed Amy milk. Nicole tugged at Ben's shirt hem. Unaware Ben was prompted by Nicole to leave, I decided to give them one more clue. There's no one with tan skin in my family, not just my grandfather. None of my relatives either. Wait, you mean? It seemed Ben finally understood what I was implying. Meaning, the chances of you two having a tan child are 0. I stated emphatically. Ben's body started to tremble. So, it's a waste of time being here. Let's go back, shall we? Nicole urged Ben to leave, but now that he understood the situation, he hesitated. Turning to Nicole, Ben confronted her sternly. What does this mean? There's no way we could have a tan child. Then whose child is this? There's something else I want you to see. Saying that, I snatched the keychain with Chris's photo. That Nicole always carried in her bag and showed it to Ben. Chris is publicly known as being half Mexican and half American. Nicole has always admired Chris's exotic looks, often calling them cool. This guy. He has exactly the same skin tone as Amy. Nicole showed a frightened face, but then she defiantly started to laugh. Ah. It's finally out. That's right. Amy isn't your child. She's the child I had with Chris. When I seduced him with a little charm, he fell for me right away. With that, Nicole began to boast about her relationship with Chris. You were deceiving me? Like, seriously. Did you really think a young and cute girl like me would be seriously attracted to an old man like you? That's hilarious. How naive can you be? I only approached you because you're an executive at a good company. And looked like you had money. Having a lot of money means I can buy more of Chris's merch. If I buy him lots of gifts, I can have him all to myself. So I was just an ATM to you. Realizing everything, Ben was furious. Obviously. I've been putting up with this for the money. Otherwise, who would share a bed with an old man like you? I let you live your little dream for 3 years. You should be thanking me. What? Before my and my sister's shocked eyes, Nicole and Ben started arguing. Enough from both of you. The baby is crying, don't you hear her? My sister shouted, stopping their quarrel. I don't want to see such disgraceful behavior anymore. You two are nothing to us now, just strangers. Leave right now. Driven out by my sister, Nicole and Ben left. Poor Amy. I genuinely felt this way. Then, 2 months later, Ben came to see me alone. He suddenly knelt down in front of the store and shamelessly begged me. Please, Kathy. Take me back. I had a DNA test done after that. It turns out there's no blood relation between me and Amy. I was deceived. Oh, really, so what? I couldn't stand that Nicole and Chris conned me into thinking I was the father. So, I went to the concert backstage and demanded they pay me back in compensation. Oh my. What a hassle you've been through. While it didn't matter much to me, I decided to listen to him. I had also gathered information from TV and magazines about this. Chris had an affair with a married fan and impregnated her. It was widely reported that he had tricked the woman's husband into believing the child was his. Although the idol group had been known only to a small circle of fans, this scandal had made them nationally notorious. With nationwide criticism, their agency couldn't defend Chris anymore. And they terminated his contract as reported on various talk shows. I saw it on TV too, he got what he deserved. Right? They really are the worst. Ben laughed as if satisfied. Meanwhile, tabloids continued to aggressively investigate, not only Chris but also Nicole. It turned out that Nicole had been involved with multiple men, earning money to lavish on Chris. See? I'm also a poor victim who was deceived by them. So please, let's start over. Rejected. Ignoring Ben's tearful plea for reconciliation, I responded in a monotone voice. Then I called my brother-in-law from the back of the shop to carry Ben out if he refused to leave. If you keep bothering Kathy, I'll call the police. Ted said sternly, and Ben walked away dejectedly. A month later. Although the magazine stories had died down, reports about Chris and Nicole continued. According to articles, Chris, now jobless, was exploiting Nicole. Nicole had started working in the nightlife to earn living expenses. It was difficult for Nicole and Chris to raise a child under financial strain. Ultimately, feeling pity for Amy, my sister and her husband decided to take her in and raise her. Despite everything, this child is still our granddaughter. That's right. The child isn't to blame. While running the general store daily, my sister and her husband took care of Amy. As for me, since then, I moved away from home and opened the sewing school I had always dreamed of. I couldn't always depend on my sister and her husband. Megan had said, "You can stay as long as you like." But when I mentioned I had things I wanted to do, she gladly encouraged me to pursue them. Amy's first birthday is coming up soon. What should I get her as a gift? Half wanting to see Amy and half to see my sister and her husband. I still occasionally visit the family store whenever I find the time.
"You must have lost your way," were the chilling words Marla uttered, her voice laced with faux concern as I found myself unable to enter my own home, my key futile against the new locks. I stood frozen on the porch, disbelief and anger brewing inside me as I stared at the smug expression on my mother-in-law's face. At 58, Marla still exuded an air of aristocracy and old money, draped in designer clothes and jewelry that sharply contrasted my casual, thrift store-inspired style. "What's going on, Marla?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Why can't I get into my house?" "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused," Marla replied, her words dripping with condescension. "This is my son Elliot's house. Now why don't you run along home to your little apartment?" My hands curled into fists as I fought the urge to grab Marla and force my way inside. This was the house I had grown up in, that my parents had left to me when they passed away last year. Elliot and I had spent the last 6 months renovating it, infusing each room with special touches that represented our shared vision for our future. This was my sanctuary, my pride and joy. And now Marla was trying to take it all away. "Don't play games with me," I said sharply. "You know very well this is my house. Now open the door and let me in." Marla sighed theatrically. "I'm afraid that's simply not possible. You see, Elliot signed the house over to me for safekeeping while he's away on business. We can't have undesirables barging in now, can we?" My blood boiled at her words. Elliot, my husband of 5 years, was currently on an extended work trip in Japan. He always fretted about me being alone, but I cherished my independence. Little did I know, he had made arrangements behind my back and given his manipulative mother total control in his absence. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain calm. "Elliot would never sign over my house without talking to me first." "You're lying, Marla." "Am I?" she challenged, her brown eyes glinting. "Why don't you give my darling son a call and find out?" I wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug look off Marla's face. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "Fine. I'll call Elliot and clear this whole thing up," I replied evenly. "But don't get too comfortable in my home. You won't be staying long." Marla merely chuckled and waved her fingers at me in farewell. As I walked down the front steps, I turned to see her disappear inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Rage and disbelief warred within me as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house I had poured my heart into. Marla had always resented my common upbringing, believing her precious architect son could do better than a freelance graphic designer. But I never imagined her snobbery and disdain would manifest in something so cruel. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Elliot's number. He answered on the third ring, his cheerful voice like a balm to my soul. I quickly explained what had happened with Marla. A heavy silence followed, broken only by Elliot's deep sigh. "Corinne, there's something I have to tell you." "I can't believe you would do this to me," I said, my voice trembling as I paced the small confines of my studio apartment. On the video call, Elliot looked back at me helplessly. "I'm so sorry, Corinne. I never meant for it to happen this way. My mother ambushed me with the paperwork just as I was leaving for the airport. She claimed it was just a temporary measure for emergencies. I didn't realize she had other plans." I raked my fingers through my hair in frustration. "Your mother has always hated me. How could you think giving her any control over my house was a good idea?" "You're right. I messed up," Elliot admitted. "I let my mother manipulate me, and you're paying the price." I sighed, my anger dissipating. I knew Marla's conniving ways all too well. "Well, it's done now. We need to focus on getting my house back." "I'll be home as soon as I can. We'll sort this out, I promise," Elliot replied. We said our goodbyes, and I sank down onto my lumpy mattress, wondering how I had gone from renovating my childhood home to being effectively homeless in just one day. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Each morning, I stopped by the house, knocking loudly despite knowing Marla wouldn't let me in. I needed her to know I wasn't going anywhere. Afternoons were spent at coffee shops, using their Wi-Fi to work on freelance design projects. Evenings were reserved for takeout food and strategizing my next moves with my friend Julia over the phone. Nearly a week had passed when I returned to the house one morning to find the front door unexpectedly ajar. I entered cautiously, surprised by the drastic changes that had already taken place. The beautiful pottery and artwork I had proudly displayed were gone, replaced by garish paintings I recognized from Marla's previous home. My cozy, bohemian furnishings had disappeared, swapped for stiff, antique pieces that exuded cold formality. "Hello, dear, I hope you like what I've done with the place." Marla's falsely sweet voice rang out as she sashayed into the room. I bit my tongue to stop myself from screaming at her. "Didn't take you long to make yourself at home," I said bitterly. "Well, it is my home now," Marla replied snidely. "Anyway, I'm hosting the Ladies' Society tea here tomorrow. I assume you can show yourself out?" I stood there fuming as she prattled on about plans for redecorating the kitchen and removing the flower garden I had painstakingly nurtured. It was clear she intended to erase any trace of me from this house, from my colorful tiles in the bathroom to the secret hideout Elliot and I had built as kids. "Just remember, this isn't over," I told Marla as I left, catching a glimpse of her scowling before the door slammed shut behind me. As I walked back to my car, I took some deep breaths, trying to regain my composure. I knew Marla's scheme was only beginning, and I would need to be strategic and resilient to survive this battle. But as I caught sight of my childhood home one last time, I made a vow. One way or another, I was taking back what was mine. The next few weeks were agonizing. Marla's presence seemed to infest every aspect of my life, no matter how hard I tried to avoid her. She hijacked the weekly neighborhood potluck, critiquing my common potato salad recipe and insisting on upscale catering instead. When I volunteered at the community garden, she was suddenly everywhere, gossiping loudly about my unladylike appearance. At the grocery store one day, I overheard her telling the cashier about Elliot's gold-digging wife who married him for his money. I had to stop myself from dumping my cart of items over her primly styled hair. The final straw came when she crashed the annual fundraising gala for the youth art program I had helped launch. I was mingling with donors when Marla appeared, interrupting every conversation to shift focus towards herself. "You'll have to excuse my daughter-in-law's eccentric taste in fashion," she simpered to a businessman I was speaking with. "I do wish Elliot had chosen someone a bit more polished, but we make do." I clenched my fist tightly around my champagne glass to stop it from shaking. The past few weeks of Marla's non-stop attacks had pushed me to my breaking point. I wanted nothing more than to scream at her to stop ruining my life, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted, a public spectacle that made me look deranged. So I quietly excused myself from the conversation and slipped outside, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. I tried Elliot's number again, but my call went straight to voicemail. With his long hours and remote job site, our communication had dwindled to quick check-ins and fuzzy video calls. I had never felt more alone. I steeled myself and went back inside, avoiding Marla for the rest of the evening. When I arrived home that night, I realized she had escalated her sabotage. A large moving truck was parked outside, and 2 burly men were hauling my furniture and belongings out the front door. "What are you doing?" I cried, rushing over. "Just doing a bit of redecorating, dear," Marla called out from the porch, smirking. "I donated your tacky old things to charity. Don't worry, the new items will be much more elegant." I helplessly watched years of my collected items disappear into the truck. The quilt my grandmother had stitched, the retro table Elliot had refurbished for my birthday, the overstuffed sofa covered in memories. Soon, nothing remained but empty rooms and the biting scent of fresh paint. Numbly, I entered my tiny apartment. Any remaining energy had been sapped, replaced by a cold sense of hopelessness. I had tried to fight back subtly against Marla, but at every turn she had outmaneuvered me. As I lay in bed that night, darkness clawing at the edges of my mind, a single thought emerged like a flicker of light. If I couldn't win by playing nice, it was time to get tough. Marla wanted a war? That's exactly what she would get. The next morning, I began to plan my counterattack. I sat staring in disbelief at the legal document in my hands, the words blurring together. Marla hadn't just manipulated her way into my home. She had actually made herself a co-owner through fraudulent means. According to the paperwork, she had produced a handwritten will, supposedly left by my late father, stating he wanted Marla to have joint custody of the house. But I knew without a doubt it was fake. My father had made me the sole beneficiary in his official will, leaving me the house and small inheritance. Marla had woven an elaborate scheme to steal everything. I sucked in a sharp breath, trying to calm the rage bubbling inside me. After speaking with my lawyer, I now understood the full extent of Marla's deceit. She had been planning this for a while, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and I had played right into her hands by not having my own name added to the property records once I inherited it. Marla must have fabricated the will, bribed an official, and then coerced Elliot into signing over temporary rights in his absence. She knew I didn't have the proper legal documentation to fight back, or the money for a prolonged legal battle. I had spent the last few days camped out in my car near the house, only leaving to use the gym showers and pick up snacks. I was determined to confront Marla face to face about her duplicity. When her Cadillac finally pulled into the driveway, I leaped out of my car and rushed over before she could escape inside. "Well, look who it is," Marla sneered. "Come to beg for money, or just to admire my lovely new landscaping?" "Cut the act, Marla," I snapped. "I know what you did. You forged a will so you could steal my house." I waved the document in her face. Marla glanced at it casually, then met my gaze with an icy stare. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but clearly the stress has become too much for you." She spoke slowly, as if addressing a child throwing a tantrum. "Enough!" I shouted, finally losing my cool. "That will is fake, and you know it. My father would never have left you anything. You're a lying, manipulative thief." For a long moment we stood there, eyes locked, the truth hanging nakedly between us. Then Marla's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Sweet, naive girl. Even if what you're alleging is true, do you really think you can stop me? I hold all the power now. The law, money, status, it's all on my side." She leaned in close, her cultured voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Face it, you don't belong here. Why don't you crawl back to the gutter where you came from?" I recoiled at her words, the pain cutting deeply. But the initial anguish quickly transformed into iron resolve. I had tried handling this legally and ethically, and it had failed. Now it was time for a new strategy, no matter how extreme. Marla seemed to sense the shift in me. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty flickered across her face. I gave her a thin smile. "You're right about one thing, Marla. You've held all the power until now, but that ends today." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing agape on the sidewalk. I had a lot of planning to do and nothing to lose. The time had come for war. Over the next few weeks, I became consumed with gathering evidence against Marla. I knew I needed hard proof of her deceit if I had any hope of reclaiming my house legally. I started with the fake will, working with a lawyer friend to analyze the document. We discovered anomalies, the wrong type of paper, a font that didn't exist when my father was alive. It was enough to cast serious doubts about its authenticity. Next, I reached out to my father's old business partner, someone I knew Marla had been cozying up to for years. After some persuasion, he finally admitted she had asked him to act as a witness and verify the will. The final piece fell into place. I also began trailing Marla, documenting her activities and conversations. Most days she flitted aimlessly around town, a bored socialite looking to stir up drama. But she seemed to have a weekly appointment that piqued my interest, a visit to a rundown apartment building on the edge of town. One overcast Tuesday, I followed Marla's Cadillac to the familiar spot and watched her disappear inside. A few minutes later, she emerged looking worried, accompanied by a squat, nervous-looking man I recognized as the town clerk. After exchanging whispered words and passing a thick envelope, they quickly parted ways. My mind raced with possibilities. Blackmail? Bribery? Either way, this man clearly knew secrets that could threaten Marla's polished veneer. Over the next few weeks, I continued tailing Marla, compiling a detailed record of her activities and odd meetings. Her mask of aristocracy and moral superiority had slipped, revealing deceit and corruption. I wanted it all exposed. The final piece fell into place when I convinced the nervous clerk to meet me one night for drinks. A few rounds later, his lips started to loosen, confessing how Marla had paid him handsomely over the years to conveniently lose certain records and speed along questionable documents. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I requested an emergency hearing with the judge overseeing my house dispute. My lawyer and I laid out the paper trail of fraud and deception Marla had perpetrated to gain control. After reviewing the proof, the judge agreed to freeze all actions relating to the property's ownership until a full investigation could be completed. For the first time in months, I felt empowered again. The law had failed me before, but now justice finally seemed within reach. Marla must have realized her scheme was unraveling. She became a ghost, her usual swarm of social activity ceasing. No more smug morning jogs past my car. No more popping into restaurants to loudly discuss her summer plans for my home improvements. But her disappearance didn't fool me. I knew this temporary retreat was just the quiet before the storm, a chance for her to strategize how she could regain the upper hand. Well, I was done being strategic. Marla wanted an all-out war, I would give her one. And this time, only one of us was walking away victorious. The day of the showdown arrived. Armed with my evidence, I marched up to the front door of my house, ready to confront Marla for the last time. Before I could knock, the door swung open abruptly. Marla stood there scowling, clearly perturbed that I had caught her off guard. "What do you want now?" she snapped. "We need to talk," I replied evenly. "May I come in?" Marla hesitated before reluctantly stepping aside. I crossed the threshold, my emotions swirling as I stood in the home that had been stolen from me. Nothing looked familiar anymore. My bohemian decor had been replaced by gaudy antiques and impersonal minimalism. But underneath Marla's superficial touches, the heart and bones of the home remained. The flow of the rooms my mother had designed, the creaks in the floorboards my father had never fixed. I took a deep breath. "I know what you did, Marla. The will was fake. You bribed the clerk. You have no legal right to my house." Marla scoffed. "You have no proof of these ridiculous allegations. I'm growing very tired of your harassment." I held her icy gaze unflinchingly. "Actually, I have plenty of proof. Sworn statements exposing your lies, records of your shady dealings. I know enough to destroy your facade of respectability." Marla's defiant expression wavered slightly. I pressed my advantage. "It's over. Your schemes stop now. Vacate my home immediately, or I take this evidence to court and ensure you face charges." Heavy silence descended as Marla stared at me stone-faced. For a moment, I thought she might actually acquiesce. Then her lips curled into a sneer. "Do you think a few pieces of paper can scare me? I built an empire while you still clung to your parents' apron strings. No one will believe the delusional ramblings of a petty little... Mom, stop. We both turned in shock at the newcomer's voice. Elliot stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, his face etched with grief and disappointment. Marla's haughty demeanor instantly melted. "Elliot, you're home early." She scurried over, attempting an embrace. He held up a hand. "I heard enough, Mom. Corinne told me everything. How could you betray me like this?" "She's lying." Marla shrieked, pointing a manicured finger my way. "I'm the victim here. This vindictive girl has done nothing but spew vicious untruths since the day you married her." "No more lies," Elliot thundered. "I made excuses for you my whole life, but I won't let you hurt my family anymore." He moved to stand by my side, slipping his hand into mine. Marla gaped at him in disbelief. "Darling, please, be reasonable," she implored, her voice cracking. "I'm done being reasonable," Elliot replied wearily. "This ends today. Vacate Corinne's home now and never bother us again." Marla stared wildly between us, the madness clear in her eyes. For a moment I thought she might lash out physically in a final desperate act, but Elliot's stoic presence kept her contained. Finally, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she shoved past us and disappeared into the guest room, emerging minutes later with 2 hastily packed suitcases. Elliot kept his eyes trained on the floor as his mother paused next to him, waiting for some show of affection, forgiveness, anything. But he remained stony and silent. The click of her heels faded as Marla retreated down the walk. I watched through the window as her Cadillac glided away, disappearing around the corner, perhaps for the last time. In the weeks following Marla's eviction, Elliot and I worked non-stop to reclaim the house. We boxed up her garish furnishings and listed them for sale, using the money to restore the cozy bohemian aesthetic I had lovingly created. Elliot immersed himself in repairing the structural damage Marla had wreaked, while I scrubbed away every trace of her, wanting to cleanse the home of her poisonous presence. We received regular vitriolic calls and texts from Marla, who was now living in a budget motel on the edge of town. Her life of leisure had been permanently disrupted. With her web of lies exposed, old social contacts had abandoned her. Even the lawyers she approached refused to represent someone with her reputation. She was well and truly friendless for the first time in her privileged life. I almost felt pity seeing how far the once untouchable socialite had fallen. But the sting of her cruelty and deception still burned too freshly. "Maybe we should change the locks and security codes, just in case," I suggested to Elliot one evening, after an especially nasty series of messages from Marla blaming us for her downfall. Elliot nodded warily. "Yeah, it's probably not a bad idea. She's clearly becoming more unhinged." We were sipping coffee the next morning when we heard the pounding at the front door. I jumped nervously, but Elliot gave my hand a reassuring squeeze as we made our way to the foyer. I peered through the side window and groaned. Marla stood on the porch. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching a bulging folder of papers. Her fist pummeled the door relentlessly. I swung it open, noting Marla swayed slightly in her impractical stiletto heels. "What do you want, Marla?" Elliot asked with forced patience. "I want back what's owed to me," Marla shrieked. "This is my home, too. I have a legal right." She shook the folder violently at us. I stifled a bitter laugh. "Still clinging to the lies, Marla? That forged will didn't work before. It won't work now." Marla's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Oh, this has nothing to do with the will. I'm referring to my claim as co-signer on this property's mortgage." She flashed a smug grin as Elliot and I exchanged stunned looks. In all the drama, we had overlooked this crucial financial detail. Sensing our realization, Marla cackled. "You didn't actually think I'd hand over my main leverage so foolishly, did you? As long as I'm tied to that mortgage, I have a path back in. So I suggest..." "No need. The mortgage has been paid off." Elliot's calm words cut through Marla's tirade. Her face went slack. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I liquidated my inheritance and paid off the entire mortgage 2 days ago," Elliot explained, crossing his arms. "You have no claim here anymore." Marla stared at him in disbelief as the folder of papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the porch. "It's over, Mother," Elliot stated firmly. "Now please leave before I have to call the police." For once, Marla had no venomous retort, no more schemes to wield. She backed away silently, teetering on her heels as she retreated to her weathered car. Elliot slipped his arm around me as we watched her go. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the sunlight wash over us, bathing everything in hopeful clarity. Perhaps this drawn-out war was finally nearing its end. And emerging from the rubble, Elliot and I had somehow found each other again. The weeks after Marla's final defeat passed in a blur. Elliot and I threw ourselves into restoring normalcy, filling the rooms with love and light once more. We unpacked my eccentric art and vintage finds from storage, arranging them alongside Elliot's architectural drawings and photography. The house slowly began to feel like ours again. Workers helped repair the structural damage and cosmetic sabotage Marla had caused in her zealous renovations. Elliot redesigned parts of the space to be more accessible for any future children we hope to have. Meanwhile, I returned to pursuing my freelance graphic design work, setting up a small home studio. It felt healing to nurture my own passion again. Within a few months, I had built up a robust client list and transitioned my work into a thriving online business. Elliot and I also focused on strengthening the bonds Marla had strained, hosting potlucks with generous neighbors who forgave my absence, having long talks with friends to clear up her malicious gossip. To our relief, we received word that Marla planned to move to another state permanently, wanting a fresh start far removed from her ruined reputation here. We changed the locks one final time, just in case. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, we finally declared the house restored. To celebrate, we hosted an elaborate backyard barbecue. Twinkling lights were strung across the trees, music filled the air, and laughter carried on the breeze. It was a new beginning for everyone. Amongst the festivities, Elliot surprised me by dropping to one knee, presenting me with his late grandmother's ring set in a new band. "I know we've been through so much hardship already as a married couple," he began emotionally, "but I wanted to give you this as a symbol of a fresh start. So will you renew our vows with me?" Through joyful tears, I said yes, embracing my husband tightly. The people around us broke into cheers and applause. It felt like all the brokenness was truly behind us. On a cool evening a few weeks later, we held an intimate lakeside ceremony as the sun set brilliantly behind the trees. Surrounded by close friends and neighbors, we recommitted ourselves to each other after all we had endured. The struggles of the past year had tested us in every way possible, but ultimately the shared trauma had reforged an unbreakable bond between Elliot and I. Later that night, I rested my head contentedly on my husband's chest as we swayed together under the fairy lights twinkling on our back patio. "No matter what she tried, your mother could never destroy this," Elliot said softly, pulling me closer. I smiled up at him. Our love was always stronger than her hate. He leaned down and kissed me tenderly, the adoration in his eyes washing away any remaining shadows of the past. As we turned slowly on the dance floor, the glow from our home enveloped us in warmth. The house was no longer just brick and wood. It now embodied our resilience. With Elliot's hand firmly grasping mine, I knew I had the strength to withstand anything life threw our way next. Marla's bitterness had forged us into warriors, and together we had emerged victorious.
It was an ordinary holiday morning, the kind where the sun seemed to promise a day of leisure and laughter. I was in the hallway, coaxing my son, Harry, to hurry up for his baseball game when the world as I knew it shattered. Opening the door, I froze. There, like a ghost from a past life, stood Peter, my husband, who had vanished without a trace 3 years ago. "This is our home," he declared, his voice a strange mixture of assertiveness and uncertainty. Before I could fully process his presence, another figure emerged from behind him, Daisy, my sister-in-law. The sight of her stirred a nest of vipers in my stomach. "We're going to take custody of Harry," Daisy said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness I remembered all too well. How many times had I speculated about this very scenario? Peter and Daisy disappearing around the same time couldn't just be a coincidence. But with the whirlwind of daily life and limited resources, I had never been able to dig deeper into their disappearance. Lost in these thoughts, I barely registered Harry's voice behind me. "Hey, Mom, who are you talking to?" My heart clenched. He stood there, my brave little boy, unaware of the storm about to break.
Daisy turned her predatory smile towards him. "Oh, it's nice to finally meet you. You're Harry, right? I've wanted to meet you for so long." Her voice churned my insides. This same voice had charmed everyone around her, masking the manipulative, cruel nature I knew too well, the voice I had hoped to never hear again. Harry looked at me, confused, and then back at them. "Dad, what are you doing here? And who is she?" He moved closer to me, instinctively sensing the tension. Peter and Daisy stood there, gaping like fish out of water, clearly not expecting this confrontation. Before they could recover, Harry continued, his voice tinged with anger, "We're about to leave. Move." It was then that Peter and Daisy noticed something behind me. Their faces drained of color. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Standing there was my daughter, Lily, cradled in Harry's arms. Peter's eyes widened in shock, his gaze flicking between Lily and me. "Peter, Daisy," I started, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. "3 years ago, you left without a word. I was left alone to pick up the pieces, to raise Harry, and to face an unexpected pregnancy." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Daisy's eyes narrowed, but I continued, "I'm not the same person you abandoned. I fought hard to build a life for my children and me, and I won't let you waltz back in to destroy that." Their faces reflected shock, disbelief, and, for a fleeting moment, guilt. But it was too late for guilt, the wounds they had inflicted ran too deep. "Please leave," I said firmly. "You have no right to be here." Peter opened his mouth, likely to spout some excuse or plea, but I didn't want to hear it. I closed the door on them, on the past they represented. Turning back to my children, I saw Harry looking at me with newfound respect, and Lily gurgling blissfully, unaware of the storm that had just passed. I took a deep breath, steadying my racing heart. This was just the beginning. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my family's future. The days following Peter and Daisy's unwelcome visit were a whirlwind of emotions and memories, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. I found myself revisiting the dark days after Peter's disappearance, the sleepless nights filled with worry, and the countless hours I spent questioning what I could have done differently. Harry had struggled the most. Once a cheerful and outgoing boy, he became sullen and withdrawn, his bright eyes dimming. I remembered the countless dinners he pushed away, the school events he begged me to skip, and the cold, distant looks that replaced his warm smiles. It tore at my heart, but I couldn't find a way to reach him. As I brooded over these memories, Lily's innocent laughter echoed through the house, a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. She was my unexpected blessing, a light in the darkness of Peter's betrayal. Her birth had been a turning point for me, a moment of profound strength and vulnerability. One evening, as I tucked Harry into bed, he turned to me with serious eyes. "Mom, why did Dad leave us? Did we do something wrong?" His question hit me like a physical blow. "No, honey, you did nothing wrong," I assured him. "Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, and it's not because of anything you did." "But why did he come back? And with Aunt Daisy?" The confusion in his voice was heartbreaking. I sighed, searching for the right words. "I don't know why they came back, but I do know that we are a family, you, me, and Lily. We'll get through this together." He nodded slowly, his young face etched with worries no child should bear. "I trust you, Mom. I just wish things were like before." I kissed his forehead, whispering, "I know, my love. I wish that too." The next day, I was jolted out of my reverie by a call from my lawyer, Mr. Thompson. "Maya, we need to discuss your legal options. Peter and Daisy's claim is baseless, but we should prepare a case." I listened, my mind racing. This was my chance to fight back, to ensure that Peter and Daisy couldn't hurt us anymore. "Let's do it," I said firmly. I want to protect my children, and I won't let them be used as pawns in whatever game Peter and Daisy are playing. Mr. Thompson's voice was reassuring. You're making the right decision. I'll start preparing the documents. We'll show them that they can't just walk over you. As I hung up, a sense of determination settled over me. Peter and Daisy had underestimated me, thinking I would crumble under their pressure. But they were wrong. I was stronger now, tempered by the trials I had faced. I looked at Harry playing with Lily and knew that I would do whatever it took to keep them safe. This was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice for my children and me. Peter and Daisy had awakened a fierce protectiveness in me, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. As the days turned into weeks, my resolve hardened like steel. I was prepared for the legal battle ahead, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional warfare that ensued. Peter and Daisy, like vultures circling their prey, began their campaign to wear me down. One afternoon, as I collected Harry from school, I found them waiting, their presence a dark cloud on the sunny day. Daisy's voice was sickeningly sweet as she called out to Harry, "Hi, sweetie. We've missed you so much." Harry clung to my hand, his body tense. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter stepped forward, his expression one of feigned concern. "We just wanted to see you, son. We're your family too, you know." I felt a surge of anger. "You lost the right to call yourself his family when you abandoned him," I snapped, pulling Harry closer. Daisy's eyes narrowed, her facade slipping. "Maya, you can't keep him from us. We have rights." "Rights? You have no rights here," I retorted, my voice cold. "You both made your choice 3 years ago. Now live with it." Peter's face twisted in anger. "You think you're so perfect, Maya. You're just a bitter woman who couldn't keep her husband happy." I could feel Harry's grip tighten on my hand, his small body shaking. "Let's go, Harry," I said, turning to leave. But Daisy wasn't done. "You'll regret this, Maya. We get what we want. We always do." Their threats echoed in my ears as we walked away, but I wouldn't let them see my fear. I had to be strong for Harry and Lily. That night, as I lay in bed, their words haunted me. The idea of losing Harry to those two was unbearable. I couldn't let it happen, I had to be smarter, stronger. The next day, I met with Mr. Thompson, my determination like a shield around me. "I want full custody of Harry, and I want Peter and Daisy to have no visitation rights," I said firmly. Mr. Thompson nodded. "It's going to be a tough battle, but I believe we can win this. You're a good mother, Maya. The court will see that." As the legal preparations progressed, I found an unexpected ally in my own home, Harry. One evening, he came to me, his young face set in a serious expression. "Mom, I want to tell the judge that I want to stay with you. Dad and Aunt Daisy, they're not my family, not really." Tears welled in my eyes as I hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Harry. That means more to me than you'll ever know." The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm on the horizon. I walked into the courtroom with Harry by my side, ready to fight for our future. As the proceedings began, Daisy tried to play the doting aunt, her words dripping with insincerity. Peter played the role of the repentant father, but his eyes were cold and calculating. But when Harry spoke, his voice clear and unwavering, the truth shone through. "I want to stay with my mom. She's been there for me when no one else was." The judge's decision came like a ray of sunlight through the clouds, full custody granted to me, with no visitation rights for Peter and Daisy. As we left the courtroom, Peter's face was a mask of rage, and Daisy's eyes burned with malice. But it didn't matter. We had won, Harry and I, together. The victory in court brought a temporary sense of peace, but it was short-lived. Peter and Daisy, like wounded animals, became more desperate and dangerous in their tactics. They started a slanderous campaign, spreading lies and rumors about me in our community. It was a psychological warfare I hadn't anticipated. One evening, Harry came home from school, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Mom, kids at school are saying you stole me from Dad, that you're keeping me away from him because you're mean." My heart broke at his words. "Harry, you know that's not true. Everything I've done to protect you." He nodded, but the doubt was evident in his eyes. "I know, Mom, but it's hard. They don't understand." I hugged him, feeling his small body tremble. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but we'll get through this. We're stronger than their lies." As the days passed, the rumors grew more vicious. Daisy had always been cunning with her words, and now she used them like a weapon to turn my world upside down. I knew I had to fight back, but I was wary of stooping to their level. Then one day, Peter showed up at my workplace, a facade of remorse plastered on his face. "Maya, can't we just talk about this, for Harry's sake?" His words were like poison, and I could see through his act. "There's nothing to talk about, Peter. You made your choice. Now live with it." He grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "You're ruining my life, Maya. You and that kid." I pulled away, my voice steady. "No, Peter. You did that all by yourself." As I walked away, his parting words sent a chill down my spine. "This isn't over, Maya. I won't give up that easily." The legal victory had given me custody of Harry, but it hadn't ended the war. Peter and Daisy were relentless, and I could see the toll it was taking on Harry. He was caught in the middle of a battle he didn't understand, torn between his biological father and the mother who had never left his side. One night, Harry came to me, his face etched with conflict. "Mom, what if Dad changes? What if he wants to be a real dad?" His words hit me hard. "Harry, I know he's your dad, and it's normal to hope for that. But we have to see people for who they are, not who we want them to be." Harry was silent for a moment, then looked up at me, his eyes clear. "I know. I just wish things were different." I held him close, whispering, "I do too, Harry. I do too." Despite the ongoing battle, I had to ensure that Harry and Lily remained my priority. They were my strength, the reason I fought so hard, and I would do anything to protect them, to give them the life they deserved, free from the shadows of Peter and Daisy's deceit. The relentless campaign by Peter and Daisy took a darker turn, evolving into outright harassment. They seemed to be everywhere, outside my workplace, near Harry's school, always lurking, always watching. It was a psychological siege, and I felt its weight every day. But I refused to be intimidated. It was time to hit back, to make them realize they couldn't trample over our lives without consequences. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Thompson, my resolve like iron. "Mr. Thompson, it's time we take more aggressive legal action. I want to file for a restraining order against Peter and Daisy, and I want to sue them for harassment and defamation," I declared. Mr. Thompson nodded in agreement. "I think that's a wise decision, Lord. Their behavior is unacceptable, and it's time they face the legal repercussions." The legal proceedings were grueling, but I stood firm. In court, Peter played the victim, a man wronged by his vindictive ex-wife. Daisy, ever the actress, wept about being denied the chance to be a part of her nephew's life. But their performance couldn't mask the truth. The judge saw through their facade and granted the restraining order. Additionally, they were ordered to pay damages for their defamatory actions. As we left the courtroom, Peter's face was a mask of fury while Daisy's eyes burned with unspoken threats. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had the law on my side. Their defeat in court, however, did little to quench their vendetta. If anything, it seemed to fuel their spite. One day, I received a chilling phone call from Peter. "You think you've won, Maya? You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? I'll make sure you regret this," he hissed through the phone. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the fear his words invoked. "You brought this on yourself, Peter. I'm just protecting my family. You haven't seen the last of me, Maya." "This isn't over," he spat before hanging up. His threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, but I wouldn't let it break me. I had Harry and Lily to think about. They were my world, and I would go to any lengths to shield them from Peter and Daisy's malice. But as days turned into weeks, the constant stress began to wear me down. The never-ending vigilance, the fear of what Peter might do next, the pressure of being a single mother, it was all-consuming. One evening, as I put Lily to bed, Harry came to me, his expression somber. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Dad sounded really mad on the phone. I pulled him into a hug, my heart aching for the worry he had to bear. "We're going to be okay, Harry. I won't let anything happen to us, I promise." But even as I spoke the words, I knew the battle was far from over. Peter and Daisy were like a storm on the horizon, and I needed to be ready for whatever they threw our way. The weeks following the court ruling were a tense and watchful time. Peter and Daisy, now bound by the restraining order, had receded into the shadows. But their silence was more unnerving than their threats. I knew this lull was just the calm before another storm. Then it happened. Daisy, in a move of sheer desperation, orchestrated a public scene. I was picking up groceries when she appeared out of nowhere, screaming accusations. "You're a monster, Maya. You've torn our family apart," Daisy wailed, drawing the attention of bystanders. I stood my ground, my voice steady. "Daisy, you need to leave. You're violating the restraining order." Her face twisted in rage. "I don't care. The world needs to see what kind of person you really are." But her theatrics backfired. The store manager, recognizing the disturbance, called the police. As they escorted a hysterical Daisy away, her image of the wronged aunt crumbled. This public meltdown was the final straw. The police charged Daisy with violating the restraining order and public disturbance. Peter, too, faced consequences. His involvement in the harassment and defamation, now fully exposed, led to his arrest. As I watched them being taken away, a part of me felt a pang of pity. They had descended into their own hell, a pit they had dug with their lies and hatred. But this feeling was quickly overshadowed by a sense of justice. They were finally facing the consequences of their actions. In the aftermath, the community's perception shifted. The truth about Peter and Daisy's deceit and manipulation became apparent. People who had once whispered behind my back now offered their apologies and support. Harry, witnessing the downfall of his father and aunt, had mixed emotions. "Mom, is it wrong to feel happy about Dad and Aunt Daisy getting arrested?" I took his hand, understanding his inner turmoil. "It's okay to feel relieved, Harry. They hurt us a lot. It's okay to want justice for that." The battle that had consumed our lives for months finally seemed to be over. Peter and Daisy, once towering figures of intimidation, were now diminished, their power to harm us stripped away. As I tucked Harry and Lily into bed that night, a sense of peace settled over me. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. With Peter and Daisy's legal retribution, a heavy burden lifted from our shoulders. The days seemed brighter, and our home was filled with laughter once again. Harry's smile returned, and Lily's innocent giggles were a balm to our scarred hearts. The community's support was overwhelming, apologies turned into offers of help, and slowly the rumors and whispers faded away. We were rebuilding our lives, piece by piece. But the true testament to our newfound peace came on my birthday. Harry, now more mature and thoughtful, had a surprise for me. He approached with a shy smile, a small gift in his hand. "Happy birthday, Mom. I made this at school for you," he said, handing me a beautifully crafted photo frame. It held a picture of the three of us, smiling and happy. Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him. "Thank you, Harry. This is the best gift I could ever ask for." Later that day, as we celebrated with a small party, our little family felt whole again. Friends and neighbors joined in, their presence a symbol of the life we had reclaimed. During the party, a new face appeared. It was Ben, a kind and understanding man I had met through my work. His support during our trials had been unwavering, and his presence now felt like a promise of new beginnings. "Happy birthday, Maya. I hope this year brings you all the happiness you deserve," Ben said, his eyes warm and sincere. I smiled, feeling a spark of something new, something hopeful. "Thank you, Ben. It's already off to a great start." As the party wound down, Harry came up to me, a serious look on his face. "Mom, I've been thinking, maybe it's okay to start new things, to be happy again." I knelt down to meet his gaze. "It's more than okay, Harry. We've been through a lot, and we deserve to be happy." He nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. "I like Ben. He's nice, and I think he makes you happy." I hugged him, my heart full. "He does, Harry, and I'm glad you like him." That night, as I put Harry and Lily to bed, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't known in years. We had faced our demons and emerged victorious. Our future was ours to shape, and it looked bright and full of promise. Life had thrown us into turbulent waters, but we had learned to navigate the storm. Now, it was time to enjoy the calm, to embrace the new dawn that awaited us.
This is the tale of how my life was completely turned upside down twice, and my name is Emily. I suppose I ought to begin at the beginning. In a tiny suburban town, I was born to devoted parents, Larry and Joanna David. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a journalist. Although we were poor, we were content. Before I was 14, my life was rather typical. After that, everything changed. My folks were traveling home from a dinner party on a wet Friday night. The phone rang as my granny and I were watching a ridiculous cartoon at home. I will never forget the shiver that shot down my spine upon hearing my grandmother sob quietly in the kitchen. The days that followed were a haze. Mom had perished instantly in the crash. They told us. Dad made it through, but not by much. He was only a shadow of the man I knew when I saw him for the first time in the hospital. With his legs crushed, the doctor said he would never walk normally. Whispering, "Emily," he reached for my hand and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I truly apologize." I didn't know why he was expressing regret. He wasn't at blame. Their car had been hit by an inebriated driver. But as I grew older, I came to understand that he was sorry for our circumstances, the challenges ahead, my mother's passing, and the father he felt he could no longer be. However, my father, Larry David, underestimated his own strength. Once he was discharged from the hospital and got used to living in a wheelchair, he gave his work his all. He was an accomplished writer who now devoted all of his energies to his work as an editor at the city's leading newspaper. Dad made sure I had what I needed as I approached adolescence. He urged me to get involved in clubs, meet people, and lead a typical life. In all honesty, I liked to spend time with him more. He helped me with my homework, we argued about books, and we watched old films together. Dad insisted I go away to school when it was time for me to attend college. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he stated. "Kindly forget about me. I'll be all right." Though I was hesitant, I decided to enroll in college since I knew he was right. I studied accounting at the State University of New York. I met Emma there, and she ended up being my best friend. I got to know Paul, her second cousin, through Emma. Paul was witty and polite, and when I told him about my dad, he didn't bat an eyelash. He actually hit it off with Dad the first time he saw him, instantly connecting over their love of vintage rock. Paul told me later, "You're amazing for taking care of your dad all these years, and your dad is cool." I attempted to hide the fact that I was shining on the inside. For the first time since the accident, I began to believe that one day I would actually be able to lead a regular life, one filled with love, laughter, and perhaps even my own family. After graduation, everything began to fit together like a puzzle. Paul started working as a long-haul truck driver, and I was hired by the local tax agency. After 4 years of dating, on a cool autumn evening in the park, where we went on our first date, he asked me to marry him. Though I was ecstatic, there was one thing I should clarify. "Yes, Paul, but I'm unable to part from my dad. I'm needed by him." Paul smiled wide and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the 3 of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the place as I stood there holding Paul's hand. I felt like I was living a fairy tale, but every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Mar, and my sister-in-law, Olivia. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So your father is handicapped?" Maria asked during our first meeting, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled something bad. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to stay calm. "But he works as an editor." "How nice," she interrupted, clearly not interested. Then she turned to Paul and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but Paul immediately defended me. "Mom, Emily is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Maria up, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Olivia, following her mother's lead, was just as cold towards me. After the wedding, true to his word, Paul moved in with Dad and me, and our life settled into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office while Paul was on the road for days at a time. When he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Maria and Olivia visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They acted like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once I overheard Maria whispering to Olivia, "It's a shame. Paul could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I kept quiet for Paul's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Maria and Olivia, I broke down in tears. Paul found me in our bedroom, crying. Hey, he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I sobbed. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Paul's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Maria and Olivia. As the months went by, Paul's trucking business began to grow. He was always on the road, traveling across the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I focused on my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Paul called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Emily, I've been thinking," he said. How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road. The more he talked, the more I liked the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to be interested. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Paul's income, mine, and the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Sunday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in and making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. It was peaceful, almost perfect. Then we decided to have a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, even Maria and Olivia. The party was in full swing when they showed up fashionably late as usual. They walked in, looking around with barely hidden envy. As we walked through the house, I could see Maria thinking about something. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Emily," she said quietly, "this would be perfect for Paul and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me," I managed to say. "Oh, don't look so shocked," Maria continued. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could respond, Maria marched out to the patio where Dad was talking with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him toward the driveway. "Maria," I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors." I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Paul heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he yelled, "what the hell are you doing? Let go of Larry's chair right now." Maria looked shocked by Paul's tone, but honey, I was just. "I don't want to hear it," Paul cut her off. "You and Olivia need to leave now." After they left, Paul apologized over and over to Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I had no idea she would do that. I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and patted Paul's hand. "It's not your fault, son," he said gently. "Some people just can't understand." Life settled into a new routine after that incident. Maria and Olivia kept their distance, which was fine with me. Paul focused on his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help pay for our new home. I split my time between my job at the tax office, taking care of our home, and looking after Dad. 4 years passed quickly. Our life became comfortable and predictable. Paul was on the road most of the time, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. A man's unfamiliar voice greeted me. "Mrs. Walker, this is Officer Andrew from the Highway Patrol." My heart sank. Yes, I barely managed to say. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Paul Walker, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and didn't make it floated around me, but I couldn't understand them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that the reality began to hit me. Paul was gone. The next week was a fog of grief and disbelief. I went through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely understanding what was happening. The day before the funeral, I gathered my courage and called Maria. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from a newspaper obituary. "Hello," Maria's sharp voice answered. "Maria, it's Emily," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Paul. He's gone. There was an accident." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then, to my shock, Maria's voice came back dripping with anger. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made him work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You've killed my son." I was stunned. "Maria, Save it," she snapped. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy, but don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Paul's funeral was gray and rainy, matching my mood perfectly. The church was full. Paul was well liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had come to pay their respects. After the service, as people passed by to offer their condolences, I noticed that Paul's mother and sister were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even bothered to show up for their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together." As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange because I was sure I had turned everything off before we left. "Did you leave any lights on, Dad?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the house. My heart started pounding. Were we being robbed on the day of Paul's funeral? I quickly helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Maria and Olivia in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. What the hell is going on here? I demanded my grief, momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Maria turned to me, her face a mask of fake sympathy. "Oh, Emily dear, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Paul is gone." I was speechless. Olivia added, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Don't worry. You can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel the anger building inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Maria had the nerve to look offended. "This house belongs to us now. All of Paul's property does. We're his family, after all." "Like hell you are." I exploded. "Where were you today at his funeral?" "Oh, that's right. You couldn't be bothered to show up." Maria waved her hand dismissively. "We were busy making arrangements. Now be a good girl and start packing. We'll meet you up by tomorrow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Paul, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Maria and Olivia exchanged worried looks. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. "Now, Emily," Maria began, but I cut her off. "No, you have exactly 10 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Paul and I bought it together. You have no right to be here." Maybe it was the steel in my voice or the fire in my eyes, but Maria and Olivia finally realized they had gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Maria turned to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Emily. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." The days after Paul's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Paul's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Maria and Olivia would try to take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered the call, afraid it was Maria following through on her threat of legal action. "Mrs. Walker," a crisp professional voice asked. "This is Scott Thompson from Thompson and Partners. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I felt a small flicker of hope. His will? I didn't know he had one. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Walker came to see us about 5 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing." I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind spinning. Why hadn't Paul told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Thompson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. David, thank you for coming in," he said, gesturing for us to sit near his desk. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Thompson opened a file on his desk. "Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. Thompson began to read. "I, Paul Walker, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Emily Walker." I gasped, and Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Thompson continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Emily use these resources to care for herself and her father, Larry David, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Paul was taking care of us. "There's more," Mr. Thompson said gently. "Mr. Walker left a letter for you." He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Larry. Please know that you two are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Larry were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Emily, you and Larry, not them. Take care of each other, live your lives to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Paul." I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Thompson gave us a moment before speaking again. "Mrs. Walker, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy." I looked up, sniffling, and asked, "What does that mean?" Mr. Thompson gave me a small smile and said, "It means you'll be receiving a large sum of money, enough to pay off your mortgage and more." As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Paul had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Maria's sleek sedan. "Oh no," I muttered. "What now?" Sure enough, Maria and Olivia were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Paul's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. "Emily," Maria began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet, "we need to talk about Paul's estate." I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. "No, Maria, we don't. Paul left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you." Now please leave. You're trespassing on my property." For once, Maria was speechless. Olivia tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks after our meeting with the lawyer were busy. I threw myself into settling Paul's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and just as Mr. Thompson had said, it was enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Paul's desk, I found a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and saw pages filled with his messy handwriting. It was a journal of sorts, full of his thoughts and plans for our future. One entry read, "Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids. I want to make sure they have the best start in life." My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Paul's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. "Oh, Paul," I whispered, holding the notebook close. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Paul. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. "It's okay, Emily," he said in my dream. "Everything's going to be all right." I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. The morning sickness didn't go away in the days that followed. At first, I thought it was just stress and grief, but a small voice in the back of my mind suggested something else. After a week of this, I found myself in the pharmacy, staring at pregnancy tests with trembling hands. I bought one and hurried home. The 5 minutes I waited for the result felt like the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, there were 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: joy, fear, grief, and hope, all swirling together. "Emily." Dad's voice came through the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression changed from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad." I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Emily. And this baby is a gift." His words hit me deeply. This baby was a part of Paul, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to fade, replaced by a strong determination. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's my girl. Now let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all." As we headed to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope growing inside me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Paul's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly waiting for the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Maria's sit-in. What could they possibly want now? I walked to the front of the house, one hand instinctively resting on my swollen belly. Maria and Olivia stood on our porch, looking both comfortable and slightly desperate. "Emily," Maria began, her voice missing its usual sharpness, "we need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Olivia spoke up, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet." I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. They dared to ask for more after everything they had made us go through. Saying in a calm yet forceful voice, "I'm sorry, that isn't achievable. I would like to stop talking to you." Maria's shocked and disgusted expression contorted as her eyes tightened at my growing baby bulge. She shouted, "You're pregnant. Yet, you tiny whore. It's unbelievable that you've already found someone else. Paul's corpse remains warm even in the earth." Anger shot through me, but I swallowed it. Not bothering to explain that it was Paul's kid, I did not. I didn't want such a grandmother and aunt for my child. Rather, I gave Maria a shy, sly smile that seemed to make her feel even more uneasy. I answered gently, "My personal life is none of your business. Now I think it's time for you to leave." Maria seemed to want to add more, but she must have been stopped by something in my expression. She pivoted on her heel and seized Olivia's limb. I felt a wave of tranquility go over me as I watched them drive off. I had maintained my dignity, stood my ground, and shielded my family. Paul could have felt pleased with himself.